mean, you can have units where there's mixtures of sworn and civilian in the same unit doing the same exact job function, and one is getting paid a significant difference than the other just on their base salary. Now, I understand that, the sworn officers might get, they have all of those law enforcement duties, so they get that extra compensation, carrying a weapon, all of those things. But how do you manage, how do you keep a team of people happy when half of them make significantly less than the other?
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
Last week, we started talking about money problems in forensics. There's many states, not just Florida, but many states across the country where forensic professionals are paid a very low salary. And we also started talking about FTO pay and the fact that a lot of forensic professionals are not paid to be a field training officer, which we think is something that needs to be changed. So this is now episode 4, and we're going to continue some of the discussion about money problems, and it's going to tie into our opening discussion of civilian versus sworn problems and what's causing that divide. So last week we ended on FTO pay, and I think the sworn civilian divide kind of starts with the pay differences. Wouldn't you say? That's kind of your initial introduction to the agency, and you can definitely tell there's a different dynamic on how civilians are treated versus sworn, just based on who's paid for what.
I think it's definitely dependent on the agency.
Yep.
Some agencies compensate their civilian employees in a way that's equivalent to sworn, and
right.
Of their, civilians get the same kind of benefits that the sworn get. But many of the agencies I've worked for, there's a very distinct difference between what sworn employees and what civilian employees get compensated for. And I do think for the most part, that's all fine and good. The sworn employees are doing some things that we don't do and should get compensated for it by all means.
Yes.
There are things we do identically that
should be the same.
Yeah, agreed.
If you get paid to train someone, I should get paid to train someone, as long as you have a structured training program with curriculum. The same amount of effort is there, I feel like. But I'm also biased because I've never been sworn.
Or more effort, yeah.
Yeah, or more effort, yeah. I think a lot of agencies don't realize what the forensic unit does. So when they see the training programs, they're like, oh, wow, it's really more involved than I thought. It's yeah, we do a little bit more than just throwing black powder around.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the other things people mentioned as far as money problems and civilian versus sworn go is paid if you're on call. If you have on-call shifts, you're tethered to your phone, you're not allowed to leave the county or leave your house within 30 minutes or whatever. The majority of people that I know are not compensated for the hours that they're on call. They're only compensated if they actually physically go out to a crime scene.
Yes, I would agree.
And from what I understand, I think detectives that are on call and stuff like that, they actually get paid for those hours, at least a little bit,
Yeah, I think that also depends on the agency, but most, sworn in detectives will get an automatic amount of hours. If they get called out, they'll automatically get an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And a lot of times, agencies aren't compensating civilians with any kind of, on-call status pay. That's not hugely uncommon. And I think some agencies, like our agency, they're not on call that often, like comparatively to other agencies. So they have, maybe like 6 or 7 on-call days a month, but there are agencies out there, where they have 1 or 2 CSIs and they're on call 365 days a year. And if you're
crap,
yes,
crap,
call every single day, all day and all night, all year long, then you really should be compensated for the fact that the job has taken over your life. That it's not just 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. It's also all of the outside hours as well. We had an agency, we went to training and the instructor was very proud. They had 1 CSI. And so they're
on call 365.
They're on call 365 days a year. And they were like, well, we compensate our CSI for on-call. And we were like, well, how much do you give them? And I think he said two hours a month. It was something like they pay them 2 extra hours a month for essentially being on call every day for the rest of their life. You're like, but your CSI's on call all the time. So giving,
this area is not a good area. Like, you're going to be called out. You know what I mean?
No, it's not. Yeah. They claim that the take-home car is the compensation for being on call. Oh, how kind. Can you
that's crap.
So here's the caveat for that. Like, okay, can you drive your car everywhere? Like, I feel like it's truly compensation if you can drive it like it's your regular car, If you take the car home and then it just sits in your driveway all weekend because you're, waiting to be called out, then, are you really getting anything for having that car? Like,
it's more convenient for them. Like, when I signed on to, like, as a newbie, I'm like, oh my gosh, a take-home car, like, this is awesome. And then I realized how much control they had over my life, and I'm like, please take the car. Like, I don't want it if this is what it's going to be like. So this person said, nope, I can only drive it to and from work. Then it's not compensation. It's not compensation. And that's what we're talking about. That's why people get so frustrated, is because, like, you should be compensated. I remember at the agency I worked for originally, we had worked Sunday through Wednesday for some of our shifts. And you're on call midnight to 6 a.m. on Sunday. But there's only 1 night shift person. So from 2 p.m. to midnight on Saturday, that one person could, like, shit blows up and they need a backup. So essentially my on-call time, even though it said on paper I started at midnight, I really had to start at like 8 p.m. So my whole Saturday was jacked if I wanted to do anything that night. And there's no compensation, you know what I mean? So that's why people get so frustrated. And I have also been in the situation where I've been on call and woken up like 3 times in the middle of the night, haven't physically gone out to a crime scene, but clearly I'm not getting any sleep. So it would be nice to have that little bit of compensation for that inconvenience of, into your personal life and your sleep and all of that stuff. Someone said, if we are acting supervisor, there's no compensation for answering the phones from dispatch all weekend. Yeah, that kind of sucks. I guess they would say, like, that's part of being a supervisor, but if you're acting supervisor, you just get the inconvenience without the pay. So that kind of sucks. So on top of on-call pay and FTO pay, there's no compensation for shift differentials. So for sworn personnel, they can get a little bit extra compensation if they work, overnights or whatever. And I know there's some sworn people on here with me, so let me know if that's true at your agency or not. Same thing like with nurses, if you get the crappy night shifts, you get extra compensation for that. I haven't heard anywhere that have actually done that for their crime scene investigators. So it would help getting those shifts covered if you got a little bit of extra compensation for having the shitty shift, especially if a lot of agencies treat their shifts like incentives for their senior people. They get to choose their shift based off of seniority, which is great, but those senior people could be there for another 10, 15 years. And as a newbie, if I had no hope of ever working like a day shift, and that's something I wanted, maybe I wanted to start a family or whatever, and there's no compensation for the night shift, I'd probably leave. So no shift differential for our patrol or crime scene. So at least that's equal, but there are some agencies where there is a difference, where they will compensate the sworn, they won't compensate for the civilians. And I don't think it's just like forensic personnel that should be compensated either. Dispatchers, like they're working, 24/7 as well. So, if they're working like those overnight shifts and they're civilians, it really doesn't matter. Like your life is still being disrupted in a certain type of way, and you should be compensated for that if you're someone in your agency or your sworn personnel are also being compensated for that same thing. So someone said that all they get is 25 cents per hour as a differential. At least you get something, but all shifts are based off seniority, been nights for 7 years. Yeah, it's not super uncommon. And I feel like for sworn, it's easier to have like, seniority for choosing a shift. There's a lot more movement that you can have moving up versus if you're in a forensic unit, it's very small. So, someone said they've been on nights for 7 years and probably many years to come until someone senior to them retires or something or moves on to a different agency, which kind of sucks for the new people. So someone else said no night shift differential in either sworn or civilian. At least it's equal. I like that at least it's across the board. No one gets it. But Aaron, I was just talking about shift differentials, how sometimes sworn can get those perks and civilians can't.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. We had dead people struggles. You guys know.
Oh, God.
Had to pop off for a moment there, but I'm back. Yeah. I've actually never worked for an agency that did any kind of night differential, whether you worked day shift or night shift. And I've worked both. I've worked days and I've worked midnights, and I've never gotten any different compensation. But I will say I've worked for where that's kind of across the board too. Where everywhere I worked, everybody got the same pay no matter what shift they worked, for sure.
Okay. So next up is advanced degrees and certifications.
So my sweet, darling husband has a bachelor's degree. He's a sergeant at another local agency, and I helped him, get his degree. And
no,
yes, he gets compensation for his degree. He gets compensation for attending certain courses. Obviously, they're in like a regular step plan, so he gets regular raises like once he hits his steps, and that's all part of his contract. And they do have a union where he works. Now, I have also worked at departments where we had civilian units that fought for similar things for civilians. But I think one of the problems with that is that a lot of times forensics gets grouped in with all of the other civilians. And so it's very difficult to fight for like just the things for forensics when you're grouped in with like also the secretaries, So yeah. Well, we can't fight for high risk pay for you because you're also in there with the secretaries and the records people and like, all of those people. So, and then I've worked for agencies where there were no unions for sworn or civilian, and it's like whatever, like it's the
wild, wild west.
It's their way. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, whatever. But yeah, my husband gets all those extra compensations in his pay. Now, meanwhile, I have the same things. I have, not only just a bachelor's, but a master's. I've also taken the same courses that he's been required to take. So like one of the courses he was required to take for incentive pay was like instructor techniques through the state. I also took instructor techniques. There's like a field training officers through the state. Also taken field training officer. And even though that's required for my agency for me to be able to teach or me to be able to instruct, the sworn get compensated for that and the civilian don't, even though we're both required to take it. So,
yeah. Which I don't agree with. I mean, you could call me biased all you want. Like, I haven't heard a good reason why you should compensate one group of people and not compensate the other when it comes to that.
Yeah.
With advanced degrees, like only at a certain level, if you're a civilian, it stops. Like you don't get any more incentive if you have a master's or a doctorate or anything like that. They will only recognize your bachelor's, or some agencies even your associates, or none at all.
I've worked for agencies, like the one that I work at right now, they provide us our entire uniform, like all of the parts and pieces, everything you need, including your boots. And if you know, jack up your uniforms because you're out working a case, you destroy your boots or whatever, they will provide you new ones. It's never a problem. Like they'll fully provide you. I've also worked for agencies as a CSI where they provided your uniform, like pieces of your uniform, but not your whole uniform. So one of the examples is one of the agencies I work for would not provide your boots. Well,
Gross.
yeah, they'd provide everything but your boots. Now, they didn't provide boots for the officers either, but they did give the officers a boot stipend. So they would pay them money on their paycheck to purchase their with. And the civilian forensic people also had to buy the boots, like the heavy duty boots for when they're out on call, but they were not given a boot stipend, even though they still had to wear like.
And you know you're going to go through more than one pair of boots a year. Like,
and it's shoes, like specific boots. Like I can't just like freely wear whatever shoes I want to wear. I still have to wear the shoes that are within policy for my agency, and we had to pay for them out of our pocket. And that's a very minor thing, but it was a requirement for both of us where one was getting compensated.
Yeah. Now certifications, like I think if you're going to go out, you're going to either recommend or require your people to have the III certification for latent prints or for crime scene investigators. I'm sure for the people that work in the lab, there's probably certain certifications that you have to have in order to analyze certain evidence. I'm not really sure. But if you're going to highly recommend or require that, you should compensate for it as well.
And support it. Like, support. This is something we talk about in our supervision class. But if I'm going to require or highly desire my employees to get certified, I should support them doing certification. You know? Otherwise, I really can't require it. Like,
and a little more than just like paying for the test. Like,
yeah.
Especially the latent certification. Like, I know Erin said this multiple times, but like, what, 800 people have that certification in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. So like we need to give them paid time to study, like not actually study at home. And I mean, some people will study at home and that's wonderful, but not everybody has that kind of initiative. And if I'm requiring my unit members to do that, then I have to allow them to study on their work time when they're getting paid, you know, and allowing them, you know, helping them prepare, paying for their tests, and then either compensating them once they get their certification, or if you don't compensate them, being understanding of the fact that they might take that certification and use it as a tool to go elsewhere, you know?
Absolutely.
And I've actually heard of agencies where they won't let you get your certification because they're afraid that you might leave. Or if more senior people don't have the certification, like your supervisor isn't certified, or the more senior people aren't certified, they're actually holding people back from getting it because they don't want them to seem better than the supervisor or whatever, you know, the senior people. And like my answer to that,
people need to read the book Mindset. Like, Carol Dweck in their life, because what kind of crappy mindset is that?
Yes. Yeah.
We don't want our people to grow. Come on.
If that's
There's a lot of insecurities there.
Yeah. You apply and you take a day of PTO and you go get your certification. And they're not going to let you do it.
Get certified. But yeah, so the agencies that I have worked at, the original one like made it kind of like a step plan, which I thought was great. You know, so if you got the first level certification, you get a stipend in your paycheck, every paycheck, for as long as you have a certification. And if you get the second level, then you get bumped up to the next pay, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, I don't know about the latent prints, but for crime scene investigators, I think once you hit like 7 years, that's the third level certification, and there's nothing else after that. So at least pay, you know, having some sort of stipend. And then if they lapse, you know, if they don't get recertified, or if they fail the next test, then you can just take that stipend off the paycheck and move on with your day. So I thought that was a really great way to compensate your people for having the certifications if it's something that your agency desires or requires. So someone says no pay increase for certification. A lot of them don't believe in it. That's also not a very growth mindset is that, Erin?
They don't believe in the certification, or they don't believe in getting compensated for it. We proposed acceptance. Okay, so here is my theory. Okay, so many things that we propose will be shot down, right? And I think that sometimes people give up immediately. Like, oh, they told me no, I'm never going to ask again.
Yes.
So I kind of have the theory that no never means no. No means no. Don't hear me wrong, but at work, if they tell me no, we're not going to buy that, no, we're not going to do that, no, or whatever, I literally just put like a little pause in that to make sure to revisit it a little bit down the road. So, and
nothing's a no.
Yes, and most of the things that I have asked for, if I've been patient enough to like kind of slip in like little hints about it here and there, whatever, find more creative ways to go about it, they've been pretty receptive to most of the stuff. So I don't take no as like a dead stop. No.
And if you have a proactive supervisor like Erin, that's, pretty in tune with their chain of command, your chain of command is going to change all the time, even if it's in the same term. So if this particular person said no, maybe the next one will say yes. So then you try it again.
100%.
What's that?
100%.
Yeah. Like you said, I think most people just hear the no once, and then they're like, oh, it's never going to happen. And then they never try again. Also, because this is another thing, like the sworn and civilian divide, we've talked about this too, where I feel like we do a really poor job at explaining things in a language that our sworn superiors can understand.
Yeah.
So if we don't explain well enough in their language why it's important, why it's valid, why people should get compensated, they're just going to see the money, the money tag, and they're going to be like, not good enough reason. Nope. So I think that's a opportunity for us to do a little bit better.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I think that it takes some practice to communicate, especially if you're a civilian. I've never worked as a sworn officer. I could never be a sworn officer. Like, that's not my jam. I'm totally, like, I joke about like flight or fight. Like, I'm totally a flighter, not a fighter. So yeah, 100%. So it takes some practice to, get in that kind of mindset and speak in their language so that they buy into your needs. And we have in our classes a lot of civilian supervisors that are like, I can't talk to my chain of command. My chain of command never listens to me. And I think a lot of times civilians, we come off as like whiny bitches. Yeah, so the key is not to come across as, being whiny, but like truly justifying why this is valuable to the agency. Like, one of the things I've talked to my agency about recently is I have real concerns that we are going to support, because we do support certifications. We give them paid time to study. We pay for their certifications. And I have real concerns that we will successfully get them certified, and then they will go somewhere else because they're not compensated for it. And so I've had lengthy discussions with my chain of command about
and that's a time investment for late printing examiners. That's years.
How many people are certified and why they're so valuable and why they're so rare, and all of the training and education and time that goes into that, and how much people will compensate certified examiners for elsewhere. And when they hear all of that stuff, they're like, whoa, I had no idea, as opposed to just like, we got this thing and we should be paid for it. Like, you really have to back it up with all the reasons why the agency should value that, why it matters.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes we feel like it should be just automatically respected, but they don't understand why. They don't live in the forensic world. So you kind of have to open their eyes to it a little bit better, because they're not going to understand otherwise.
That is a whole nother can of worms. Having civilians being supervised and led by sworn who don't know what we do is a whole nother can of worms. And I would agree with that. I mean, I've been led by civilians and sworn that have no idea what I do. And that really doesn't necessarily come down to civilian or sworn. That's really just a matter of like
or supervision.
You
know what it is.
Charge of your units. But I will say, like, I think obviously the chain of command does matter. The people that you above you and the relationships that you've built with them has major impact on what your units can get and, you know, the benefits that you can create for your units. I have two supervisors under me that are running our forensic units. And I tell them frequently, like, we don't think the relationships we have that much impact, but they have significant impact on our ability to get things for our unit. So it's really, really important for us to build as many relationships as possible.
And not just stay in the little bubble where you're comfortable in your own little office or own little unit. Like, you actually have to branch out and build those relationships, or every single time you ask for something, it's going to be shot down regardless because you haven't done the work.
Yep.
So someone else brought something else up. I thought it was really good. They talked about negotiations, especially like if you're getting newly hired or if you're being promoted. And I have an opinion on that. Like you said, nothing is a no, so you don't know unless you ask. But the forensic field is so highly coveted, and most people work for a government agency. I just don't, like, you can try to negotiate, but I think they're going to pay you the lowest they can regardless, because number one, it's, you know, it's a business, it's a government entity. But number two, like, there's so many people that want your spot anyway. They'll just go to the next person that will accept the lower salary.
Yeah, I think you can negotiate only if you have true bargaining chips. Like,
yeah,
really fresh out of college and you have no experience and you just have your degree, so does everybody else who applied for that job. You have no bargaining chips. Like, at that point, you should look at the salary range, see what the bottom number is, and just know that that's your salary. Like, bottom line. I think at this point in my career, I have a lot more bargaining chips that I can bring to the table, so I can negotiate my salary more, and I wouldn't be scared to negotiate my salary. But that is because I know that I've been in the field long enough that I know how many other people have very similar qualifications to mine. And I know that that pool is small. So I could argue my salary at this point in my career. But early on, if you don't have, you know, experience and you have, you know, just the standard bachelor's that kind of everybody else has, there is nothing to bargain with there. There's no chips to bring to the table at that point.
Yeah. And someone mentioned, like, their union is kind of useless right now. And I feel like we've talked to a few people that have unions and they kind of have the same take. But I also think it's because it's not like a forensic union. It's like you're lumped in with the secretaries and everyone else. So the stuff that they're fighting for isn't what you need. So it's kind of useless.
I mean, the agency that I work for now, we don't have unions. There's no union for the sworn in, no union for the civilians. And I honestly think that we get more from our agency at this agency than I did at the agency where we actually had a union. So, and some of you guys might work for departments where you have like really aggressive unions and they go out and get all kinds of things for you. And if that's the case, that's amazing, you know. But my experience, you know, like Ashley said, forensics gets lumped in with everybody else. So you're really not getting your specific needs. You're getting the needs of all the civilians, and they don't necessarily move very quickly either. Like, you wait a long time for something to happen with a union.
Yeah. I also think we have like kind of a lack of research. I have seen some things kind of start approaching. So, you know, there's a lot of research going into mental health and the toll that this job takes. But I also think, you know, there's some agencies that require you to do physicals like every year or every 2 years. And I think that would actually kind of be really interesting too, to, you know, check out the lungs and stuff like that. Or like, I know a place you worked at, a freakishly large number of people were getting cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, black powder is a carcinogenic. If you're around that like all the time, or huffing superglue fumes like that over a long period of time, can probably result into like, you know, some medical stuff down the road, which I think we need a union for. We need something, you know, that's going to fight for the forensic specific needs, not like, you know, lumping them in with the secretaries and records people and stuff like that.
Agreed.
Someone also mentioned, as far as like the sworn and civilian divide, they don't really realize the dramatic differences in the pay. And I think that is true. A lot of times, you know, when just in casual conversation, even with detectives. I'm like, yeah, I didn't get paid for X, Y, and Z. They're like, what?
Yeah. Even salary. I mean, I don't know if you touched on this when I stepped off for a second there, but I mean, you can have units where there's mixtures of sworn and civilian in the same unit doing the same exact job function, and one is getting paid significant, like a significant difference than the other, just on their base salary. Now, I understand that, the sworn officers might get, they have all of those law enforcement duties, so they get that extra compensation, carrying a weapon, all of those things. But how do you manage, like, how do you keep a team of people happy when half of them make significantly less than the other?
We're talking about like 10 to 20,000 less, and they have also other incentives. So like if you are a sworn person in the forensic unit and you have someone that's civilian, there's opportunities that you have in the agency that they don't have. Like if you wanted to do off duty, where you get paid $60 to go sit at a football game, the civilian does not have an opportunity to do that and get overtime and extra pay and stuff like that.
True story. My husband, he has work details where he like sits on the side of the road, like in construction zones, and he makes like $55-$60 an hour to sit in his vehicle for 8-9 hours. And I told you guys last week that when I was a CSI, I had to work at Olive Garden to make enough money to pay my bills. And I understand why off-duty details are offered to officers for obvious reasons, like people are wanting security on their sites, but you have your civilians who are like straight up broke, like doing things like Olive Garden on the side to make some extra cash. And like we talked about last week, coming in with all this education, possibly a lot of student loan debt and like all of these requirements that we want for them, certification, education, all of that stuff. And then they're making like peanuts, literal peanuts.
Exactly.
Oh.
And then one other person wanted to mention, like when they see the civilians just like constantly burnt out, they're not getting any extra positions, or they're not even filling the positions that they have, yet the agency just keeps cycling in more and more sworn officers. I think the climate right now, I could be off, but they can't, like, the sworn people are hurting too to feel like even have enough people on their shift. Is that wrong?
No, a lot of agencies are very short personnel on the road too.
But I have seen some other things like in Florida, whenever they had the Parkland shooting, the whole state of Florida wanted to have more school resource officers. So like that particular year, they were hiring a buttload of sworn school resource officers. They had so much money going to all of the new vehicles and equipment that they would need. So like the civilians were kind of, they were definitely on the back burner that year, and that's just like politics. There's nothing that the agency can really do about that. But I have seen the situations that they're talking about where, they just keep getting denied an adequate staffing for their, civilian forensic unit because they would rather have sworn officers.
Yeah. It's the same with equipment, because forensics is very expensive, and our tools and our toys are very expensive, and a lot of agencies will fund departments where they would prefer to put the money, like the SWAT team, the bomb squad, dogs. Getting dogs is outrageously expensive. Even things like, some of your agencies probably have like mounted patrol and like just all kinds of toys and helicopters, drones, all of that shit. So when your agency has money, they like to feed money into those areas because they can see, immediate results from that, and they can take pictures of that and put that out in the public and all of that stuff. And forensics, you're like, I need this piece of software and it costs $100,000. And they're like, holy shit. So, but the truth is that a lot of our agencies, forensics gets funded when there's like an oops, or like an, oh shit, we didn't have this piece of equipment, or like, oh my gosh, why are you guys doing it that way? And then money starts pouring into forensics because there was a mistake or a lack of opportunity to get something that needed to be collected or whatever. So I would say because all of our agencies, everything's in a cycle, like money is in a cycle. So, you may currently be in a time of drought, but at some point in the future, somebody will shine the sun on you and start pouring money your way. And you want to have someone who can aggressively ride that wave for as long as it lasts and not miss any opportunity to get money for your unit from your agency. So if your agency ever is like, why don't we have that piece of equipment? Like, immediately give them the specs for it, like everything they need to purchase it and all the reasons why. Yeah.
And I think also presentation is key too. Like,
yeah.
I just remember like doing some grant proposals and stuff like that. Like, if you can give them a good visual of what the actual piece of equipment does, they can appreciate that a lot more than you just like drafting up a paragraph essay, little memo to go up the chain and accept your request. Like, that's not going to happen. So if you can like show photos, videos, if you can have the people that actually you're going to, purchase this equipment from come and do a demo just for your chain of command, like that's how you're going to get what you need.
Yeah, getting other people to buy into it, your detectives, anyone else who will have access to it is super important for sure. I do want to say something to this one. So this one says IAI is going to require only certain classes that the agency is not willing to pay for. So this is a problem with all of us, right? We are really, for forensics, like our training budget gets hit hard. So I'm responsible for the budget every year. When I do the budget, I make sure to jam pack it with classes, knowing that they're going to cut most of them. So that way I have a good amount of classes that I can send my girls to. But you have to think outside the box. You literally cannot be like, oh, they cut all my money, there's nothing I can do. Otherwise, your unit will just stagnate. Like, you'll just stagnate, your unit will just stagnate. So there's a variety of ways that you can get free training. So one is to host a training class. Be a host, all right? So last year, our latent print unit hosted 3 classes. Our crime scene unit hosted 1 class. And for those, I think we got like 7 free seats. So I sent 7 of my people to training for nothing, just because I told a company they could use our training facility. Most of you guys have a training facility, and if you don't have one at your agency and there's a larger agency in your county, be like, hey, I really want to bring this training to the area. Can we go in on this together and split the free seats? Like, free is free, right? So if there's a specific class, like you want to get your crime scene certification and you need a bloodstain class to get that certification, then host the class. Like, if your agency is not going to send you to Texas to take the class and pay for your flight and your hotel or whatever, reach out to the company and ask to have it there. All of the forensic companies will give you free spots for hosting a training. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, it's actually not that difficult to get a class approved for IAI credits. So I've done it many times. If you have someone in your area who teaches something that qualifies as one of those classes, like
someone in another agency, it could be someone at a college,
like literally ask them to teach that class to you and submit the syllabus to the IAI for review. They'll review it. All they need is the syllabus of the class and the person's CV to make sure that that's actually a topic they're qualified to teach. And they'll give you points for it. Points you can use towards your certification. So we know people at our local agencies around here that are literal experts in certain areas of forensics and love to teach a little class. So like, we'll happily like get a group of people together for 8 hours for if you just buy their lunch or something. So you can submit all that stuff for credit hours.
And your IAI should be putting on those classes every year anyway. It's something you can attend for free. So having that fixed mindset, like, oh, my agency won't pay for it, therefore I can never get training, then you're never going to have training. If you don't think outside the box, have a better growth mindset about it, then that is probably going to hold true for you.
Yep, 100%. Yeah. One of the things we decided to do this year, which we've had to push off because of COVID, we decided to do a Central Florida Forensic Symposium where we just invited all of the Central Florida area, all of the local agencies to come and do a free training day. We offered 4 hours of crime scene classes and 4 hours of latent classes. We submitted it all to the IAI. Everything was approved, and it's completely free. So you guys can do that too. Yes.
And we did it for a lot of things. Like we had Pharaoh come out, we had metal detector clubs come out, we had Foster and Freeman come out. So open your mind to the possibilities, because they are there if you go searching for them.
Yeah, hazmat pay is a big one. I think we talked about that a little bit last week about, forensic people getting high risk pay. I mean, it's difficult to argue, but one of the things you really have to do is get your job descriptions in order. Like, you can't argue that you're high risk if your job description for all of your people doesn't specify what makes you high risk. So trying to argue for that, I would reach out to agencies around you, get their job descriptions, and make sure yours matches that.
As far as any other like sworn versus civilian stuff, I think a lot of it comes down to how you're trained. I think that's something that we don't really consider. Like for sworn people, this is just speculation because I never went through academy, but I would assume that you put a lot of value into your superiors and taking orders and, respecting the people in your chain of command, versus like when you bring on a civilian, they have a background of college, right, where you're actually taught to be skeptical and ask questions, and just because you're a certain rank, you don't automatically give as much respect as others. So I feel like it's just a language divide.
Yeah, I agree. For you, those of you that have watched us on here and been to our classes and whatever, like, I'm not a shy person, and I'll certainly speak my mind. But when I was promoted into this role, I definitely took my time to get to know my fellow lieutenants and my captain, everybody that I would be working directly with, and didn't just bust in there like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Like, I took the time to really foster those relationships. And so now I can bring a lot more things to them, because I think some of our civilians demand that authority, especially some of our newer supervisors. Like, they step into that supervisory role and they have the expectation that because they're a supervisor, they will automatically gain the respect of everybody around them, particularly the sworn officers. And that's all stuff that takes time and has to be learned. Once you have developed that relationship and they understand that they can trust you, they will respect you and value your opinion, but that takes time to build. It's not something that happens overnight. So
yeah, that one takes time. What I didn't appreciate it was the undermining, especially when I was trying to do supervisory things and make supervisory calls. And if you want to talk about rank, like, detectives are lower than you, right? So they would ask for the forensic unit to respond. I would say, nope, that's not something that we go to. And they would literally undermine me and go however high up the chain of command that they would have to go through in order to get someone to tell us to go out. So that's something that I definitely didn't appreciate. And some detectives were literally screaming in my face, which I don't feel like they would do to a sworn person.
Agreed.
But yeah, I think like you mentioned before, we can kind of come off as whiny and not really foster relationships like we should, or talk in their language, try to meet them where they're at. We just expect them to speak our language.
Yeah, I generally take the approach. I've taken the approach now that, if they're requesting us, for the most part, we will go. I mean, unless it's just absolutely absurd. Like, I've told my girls, we're not going to argue with any of the detectives or sergeants or lieutenants on the road. If they need us to go, we're going to go. And then if it's a battle that needs to be fought, we'll fight it on the back end instead of battling them on the front end. So, and that's worked out pretty well for us. We haven't had too many problems with that. Do civilians give more pushback? Yeah, I feel like they do. I feel like civilians are much spicier because really sworn personnel have that paramilitary mentality. Yes, they can and will push back, but I really feel like at the end of the day, a higher ranking officer can tell a lower ranking officer that he is commanding him to do this thing or her to do this thing, and they'll do that thing.
Yeah.
Where civilians are so yeah, civilians can be a little bit more of a challenge.
Anyway, I feel like that was pretty good, talking about all of the other pay drama, and how that can cause this foreign and civilian divide. Hopefully you guys got some good info out of that and some good solutions on how to approach problems when it comes to sworn and civilian at your agency.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us again. You guys were really participating tonight. That's so awesome.
I love it.
Love to hear from everybody.
All right, guys. Well, we hope you have a good evening. Join us next week for Taboo Topics, where we talk about changing agencies or career paths. Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.